This next talk is by Gratton. Mariev's a really high performing lean continuous improvement specialist working in government. And so she's a senior business improvement analyst. So she works Lean, Six Sigma, Agile, and GBA, Gender-Based Analysis Plus, in the Canadian public sector. She really has a human-centered lens that she brings to improvement. So she brings not just improving processes, but integrating equity, accessibility, and inclusion into the design of these systems. Why is this topic at this conference? The reason is that our failure. So if we're making improvements, continuous improvements, or projects where we don't consider some of these elements in our designs, then we have to consider them after the fact, and it takes the form of rework after, and it can really slow down your the progress of your initiative, and it excludes certain groups from participating fully in the process as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Mariev. She's got this really great take, and when I saw it, I said, this is something that's a real missing piece of thinking for our community. So Mariev, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your learnings here with us, and can't wait to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you so much, Craig. What a great introduction. I almost feel a little bit shy right now. Can everyone see my screen? And the first slide of the presentation. Yes, perfect. Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's session. As Craig said, my name is Marie-Ève Gratton. I am a Caucasian woman. I have brown hair, and I am wearing a black sweater and some round gold glasses today. So as Craig said, for today's sessions, we are going to explore how we can reduce rework and improvement projects by integrating inclusion and accessibility directly into the DMAIC. Before we start, I really want to position my perspective. I do not work directly into a GBA Plus or EDI, which is equity, diversity, or inclusivity or accessibility role. My background is in continuous improvement and transformational work. But over the past few years, I've developed a strong focus in these areas. So what I'll share today comes from practical application, experimentation, and hard lesson learned, I would say, along the way from real projects and observation. Before we go any further, I would like to start with a quick pulse check. So on the screen, you will see 4 situations that might happen in improvement projects. The first one being you had to adjust a solution after implementation, or you had received feedback that something didn't work for certain users, or the adoption was lower than expected after your launch, or you just had that moment where you thought, how did we miss that? And I'm curious to see if you ever experience any of these. So I invite you to raise a thumbs up using the reaction feature. And if you feel comfortable, you can also drop the number or combination of numbers in the chat and expand on that. Just as a safe reminder, these situations are not improvement failures, but often information gaps about human experience. Yes, Craig, you have a question?
No, I forgot to take my hand down. Sorry, Maria.
Legacy hand. All right. It's great to see that I am not alone. This is not just a me problem. I've seen a lot of thumbs up, so thank you for participating on that. David, yeah, I served all 4 of these. Relatable, all of the above. Good. All right, so a little bit more about me in some context, even though Craig has given me an amazing presentation. So my current role is working as a senior business improvement analyst in HR service delivery within the federal government of Canada, more precisely with Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities Canada. I am applying Lean, Six Sigma, and Agile into transformation initiative, and I tend to take and also prefer a collaborative approach in my projects with a lot of focus on breaking down silos and openly working across teams. Over the past 2 years, I started to notice a pattern. My projects were delivering efficiency gains, but some users could be struggling or operational team were absorbing workaround after implementation. And that is really what led me towards a GBA Plus focused learning kind of rabbit hole, if I could say, and integrating accessible and inclusive design more intentionally into my improvement work, not as an add-on, but inside the methodology itself. And before I continue, I also want to share some personal background. My first language is French, and I am neurodivergent. So occasionally I might be searching for a word, I might mispronounce something, I might stutter, repeat myself. So please don't hesitate to raise your hand if anything isn't clear or you would like me to repeat something. Sometimes my brain just moves faster than my word, and then chaos ensues. And in some ways, that perspective has really helped me into shaping my interest into inclusion work, because I've personally been on both sides of that experience of how small differences into communication or environment can affect how people engage with systems, processes, or tools. The objective today is to show how inclusion and accessibility can be integrated directly into the existing DMAIC that we know through small strategic check-ins. Really, the ultimate goal here is clear and efficient solution as always, but that works across user groups to support fairness and equity, but that can also reduce rework, risk, and delays, and as well as enhancing what we already do. And I would also like to take a moment to align on three important core concepts as we are exploring these concepts, or at least aspect of them, into the next coming slides. So talking about GBA+, which is Gender-Based Analysis Plus, it is a framework that originates from feminist policy analysis and gender equality work, and it helps us understand how people may experience a process differently based on various factors. And if we are talking about factors, we cannot ignore the concept of intersectionality, which reminds us that these factors like age, gender, socioeconomic background, roles, etc., they can all combine and create very unique experience and not just exist in isolation. And then we have accessibility, which focuses on whether people can actually access and understand and use what we design. And different barriers here can influence this. It is including, but not limited to, digital literacy. It could be physical environment, communication, language factors, and cognitive differences such as neurodivergence. Now, just for fun, let's see if we have some policy expert in the room. So does anyone know or want to guess when GBA Plus was first implemented into the Canadian public sector? You can put your answer in the chat. We have Carmen that is the most close to it. So the roots go back to 1995 with Canada's commitment to integrating gender analysis into public policy, but it did evolve into the plus, which went further than just gender-based analysis, and I think it was 2011. So David, you were not wrong on this. So in improvement work, these concepts are not separate from what we do. They really help us understand variation. And variation is already something that we really care about into Lean and Six Sigma territories. The difference here is that the variation comes from human experience and not only process steps. Quick look into some patterns that I've noticed into my work. We do a lot of things very well. We streamline processes, we remove bottlenecks, we deliver measurable results. But what sometimes gets missed is the variation into the user experience. When we design for what we assume is the typical user, differences often surface later, usually during implementation. And in some cases, they don't surface at all, which can leave people quietly struggling in silence with the very improvement we intended to help them with. And this is what leads to retrofitting solution, project delays. It could sometimes create unattended and unconscious iniquities where some people cannot fully access our processes that are designed for them. Now, talking about current gaps, there is also a few current gaps that contribute to this pattern. First, we can start with the limited engagement. I don't think this is just a personal experience. I think this is a global experience. We often hear the same voices in our workshop, consultation, etc. It's often the people who have the time, who feel comfortable speaking up, or are already engaged that tends to participate the most. That means that some perspectives remain underrepresented, even if we have the good intentions here. And then in our data gaps, our data usually tells us what is happening in the process, but not who is experiencing challenges or why. We see the volumes, the timelines, the error rates, but we don't always see the variation across the different user condition and context. Accessibility is also sometimes considered later into the project cycle, not because the teams don't care, they really do, but because assumptions about usability, it often goes untested during design or wasn't identified during the measuring phase. And then finally, one that is very close to me is the missing human factors. Many of our tools, for example, our process map is going to be excellent at showing system steps, decision points, opportunities for improvement and efficiency, but they don't always capture the human experience moving through those steps. And all of this, well, none of this is intentional. It happened in my experience because some aspects of the human experience is just usually harder to see with the tools that we typically use. So far, I've been speaking a lot from my own experience, so let us just zoom out a bit, put on all of our data hats, and look at two examples of what the research is telling us, which is research supports the early integration. If we look at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, it shows that early inclusion reduces barriers and improves participation. As well as when we are retrofitting accessibility later, it might cost 3 to 5 times more than building it right from the start. Now, if we look at the side of the Accessible Canada Act progress report, it is also showing how retrofitting later costs significantly more than designing inclusively from the start. For improvement teams and practitioners, this can translate directly into fewer corrections, faster benefits, and lower project risk. Now, let's just jump into why you are all here, reviewing an inclusive DMAIC model using the tools that we already have at our disposal. So let's start with the defining phase. This is where inclusion has one of the biggest impact because this is where the assumptions are starting to get formed. In many projects, we define the problem based on what we believe the user experience will look like. But if the range of user condition isn't fully visible yet, the scope itself can be incomplete right from the start. Integrating inclusion here means intentionally identifying who might experience the process differently before we finalize the problem statement. And this can look like expanding your stakeholder mapping beyond the usual participants. It could be including people who directly experience the process day-to-day early, asking questions like, who might struggle with this more and why when developing your project charter? It could be running a quick barrier walkthrough of steps, looking at all the physical, digital, and cognitive access points through some of the initiative that you're trying to improve. And then it could be also validating assumptions through short, informal, targeted user conversation before locking your scope and your problem statement. And this doesn't really require expertise. It's really all about curiosity. Even 30 minutes of this kind of thinking early can prevent major redesign later because you're already reducing the risk of solving the wrong problem. For example, and in my experience with HR processes, the people that are usually designing the process often aren't the ones that are using it daily, and that can easily create blind spots early. Any questions so far before I get into our measuring phase? 3 seconds of silence. I'm taking it as a no. All right. So in our measuring phase, the shift is about looking beyond the averages. We are very good at improvement work at measuring the overall performance, but averages can hide important variation. And inclusive measurement is basically asking for whom is performance different and also why. And in many ways, this aligns directly with Lean or Six Sigma thinking. We are already talking and caring about variation. Here, we are just looking about the variation across the human conditions and the context from it. This might involve segmenting your data by role, experience level, region, or access content. I could be looking at differences between your new employees and your experienced one, It could be comparing performance between remote or an office environment, identifying where errors or delays concentrate for certain users, especially the one that you had identified, and then observing users completing the process to understand what the numbers are actually meaning. For example, a process might show acceptable completion time overall, but then newer employees that are not familiar with the language or the system or the people using mobile devices might consistently take longer or have more errors. And without segmentation, we wouldn't see that pattern. And without this step, we are risking building our root cause analysis on incomplete information. And then when root causes are incomplete, solutions often requires adjustment later. Looking at our analyze phase, inclusion becomes about validating whether our root causes actually explain the variation across the users. Often we are going to identify causes that explain the majority experience, but not necessarily everyone experience. And that is a familiar risk and improvement work. If we don't validate across condition, we might identify a cause that is partially true, but incomplete. And integrating inclusion here means adding user context into the tools that we are already using, such as adding user conditions into your fishbone categories like environment, skills, or tools. You could be considering factors such as digital literacy, language clarity, work environment, or cognitive load. You could be comparing your root causes across the groups that you have identified into your measuring phase. It could be validating hypotheses with targeted user feedback before designing solutions. For instance, a team might identify user error as a root cause, but when they are looking more closely, the issue may actually be unclear instructions or unfamiliar terminology or assumption about prior knowledge. And if our causes don't explain the variation across the users, it's a signal that we are missing part of the picture. And then incomplete root causes almost always leads to adjustment later because the solution is addressing symptoms for some users, but not the underlying issues for others. Then if we are looking at the improve phase, the focus is shifting to solution design and validating. Most teams are already piloting solution, which is an advantage here. Inclusive improve means that making sure solution works across different user conditions before scaling and not just for the average majority case. And this aligns very closely with good improvement practice. We are already testing solutions before implementation, and the difference here is being intentional about who we test with. This could include adding usability and accessibility criteria into your decision matrix. It could be testing prototypes with varied users and not only the most experienced one. It could be checking the clarity of instruction and communication with diverse users as well. Adjusting tools or workflows based on feedback before launch, or it could be considering alternative way to complete tasks where it's possible. For example, sometimes we'll design a highly automated tool for the average user and then create an alternative format like a manual document for people requiring accommodation. And while that can seem supportive, it can also unintentionally reinforce the separation between the users, where some people are included into the main experience and others are redirected to a different path. Inclusive design aims to reduce that gap by making the primary solution works for as many people as possible right from the start. And including diverse users usually requires minimal extra efforts because testing is already happening. It could significantly reduce the risk of post-implementation adjustments before you're validating, before scaling, rather than correcting after your launch. And then we are jumping into our last phase, which is the control phase. In here, inclusion is all about sustaining results across user conditions over time. As we all know, processes drifts, the teams are changing, the technology is evolving, and some barriers can reappear even after a successful implementation. Inclusive control, it means monitoring variation and maintaining feedback loops. And that might involve tracking your key metrics across different user contexts where it's feasible. including inclusion or accessibility check-ins into your control plans or your SOPs. It could be adding simple feedback questions during your review or your huddles, and monitoring adoption patterns across your groups. And then it could be keeping a channel open for users to report barriers after launch, and also committing to integrate that feedback where it's feasible. Because in my opinion, the parking lot shouldn't exist for inclusion or accessibility. And this helped prevent regression and repeat the improvement cycles later. So all that said, when we are looking across all the phases, this is really just about prevention. So in the defining, we are preventing the wrong assumption. Into the measuring, the incomplete visibility. Into the analyze phase, we are preventing the incorrect root causes and improve the solution redesign. And in control, we are preventing the regression.
Maria, I might have missed it, but there's a question in the chat.
Oh, sorry. Does this include testing and or interviews in different contexts, not always online, but in person, or mixed hybrid meeting, workshop, or work sessions? Does that help with engaging customers and inclusion and reduce later rework? So are we talking just in the concept of hybrid here, Stefan? Sorry.
Good morning, everyone. Just a question on just process and engagement in doing these kinds of development projects and engaging customers. Literally, is it valuable to have a mix of settings to go out to where the customers are, not always assume that they're being online is the default?
Yeah, exactly. If you're having the possibility of a hybrid meeting workshop, I would very encourage you to create that space. It's always a little bit better. If there are some people that do have some need for accommodation when it comes to digital literacy, I would encourage making your tools accessible for in-person, but also virtual. Something that we did here a couple of years ago, which I really liked, was the concept of open house. So when we were redesigning a process and we were kind of finding a root cause, we were kind of into the testing, piloting of solutions, we would invite the entire department to see our process and then provide feedback for us. So we had every type of users. We had the new one, the experienced one, the one that didn't know about the process, the one that didn't know. And it really gave us the best feedback possible because it was coming from every type of users. Does that answer the questions? I'll take the 3 seconds of silence for
yes. It does.
Thank you so much. Yep. Now, let's take a moment to look at a fictional scenario to illustrate the differences between what happens when we apply traditional DMAIC versus an inclusive DMAIC when reviewing a process. And the process that we are reviewing using the two approaches is a new, efficient, and automated way for employees to submit a leave requests. So both approaches achieve the same efficiency gains initially. As you can see, we are reducing processing time by 40%. We have a streamlined workflows. We automated some features, but with the traditional DMAIC, some challenges are appearing after the launch, such as some accessibility barriers, like a screen reader couldn't read the content. Mobile errors were high because there was a lot of inquiries about it. Then there was a lot of inquiries around the language and the use of acronyms, a lack of flexibility for smaller groups like part-time workers or students, and then just a general assumption about the average digital literacy. If we look at the inclusive DMAIC, that could identify these earlier by allowing adjustment before implementation, as we can see into the benefit side categories in the DMAIC order on the screen. And now let's look a little bit at the outputs and the outcomes that gives us. So the traditional approach could potentially shift workload to operation and create workaround that weren't planned for or part of the process. Teams are compensating to make the solution function, which can hide the underlying issues while increasing the efforts behind the scene, creating the infamous backlogs that we all love so much. And then provide inconsistent outcomes that can affect our risk, the trust, timeline, or costs. If we look at the inclusive approach, on the other hand, it is more likely to realize results as planned with more consistent adoption across users and lower operational risk and compliances risk. And that's really the rework reduction we're aiming for, not just a fewer projects adjustment, but also a fewer downstream impacts on teams and users. And now, because we cannot talk about improvement or enhancement without at least briefly acknowledging resistance and change management through this, let's review some challenges that I have observed. And if you would like to share as we are going through them, put in the chat which of these challenges feels the most familiar into your environment. The first one being the time and capacity. So really, this sounds great, but we already stretched and the deadlines are tight. The second one being the confidence. We don't really have any experience doing inclusion or accessibility analysis, so how do we do this well without getting it wrong? And both are fair. On the time side, the goal isn't to add new steps. It's really to integrate a short inclusion and accessibility check-ins into the checkpoints and the tools that you are already using. So it really becomes part of your normal flow and your process. On the expertise side, you really don't need to be an expert to start. I am not one, I can assure you. You can build capability the same way that we built it into other areas. Start small, learn by doing, and you can borrow expertise when it's needed. In my experience, teams are usually open to this once they see it is reducing rework or at least have the potential to reduce it. The hesitation is rarely about disagreement, it's about the uncertainty on how to do it. Two other concerns that I would like to touch base on relates to data and priorities. The first one being we don't have demographic or user experience data, and that is common. The reality is that you don't need perfect data to start seeing variation. Small adjustment to conversation you're already having can provide some insight. For example, asking if anything was difficult to access or understand during the pilots, noticing who needs workaround and extra support, asking who might experience this differently. And often that qualitative information is enough to identify risk early. The second concern is competing priorities. In those situations, it helps to frame inclusion and accessibility as part of the quality and risk validation and not as an additional objective. We are already asking questions about assumptions. We are already asking questions about the risk and the failure demand. So this fits naturally within those same conversations. Sometimes it's just really about a few extra minutes at key decision points. Now, these are some of the questions I've been asked when discussing this approach, or even questions that I asked myself because I didn't know. The first one is whether this isn't just compliance check-in. Compliance is part of it, of course, but inclusive design goes a little bit further than that. It's improving usability, it's reducing support needs, and it's increasing adoption. So the outcome is better design and not just a risk avoidance. Another question is, what if we don't have diversity in our user base? In reality, variation is almost always present. It's just not always visible. Differences into experience levels, digital skills, language comfort, work environment, roles, it could be cognitive differences. And when I say that, it's including but not limited to neurodivergence, or even it could be access to technology that can all influence how people interact with a process. Another question is, where do I start? And honestly, I've asked myself this question way more than I will admit. And the answer is that you can start very simply with two questions, and that will open the floor. It's who might experience this differently, and what barriers might exist that I might not see. And you don't need to be an expert. Curiosity is enough to begin here. And then finally, one that we all love. What if leadership doesn't see the value? And that is often about the framing and the language that we use. When we connect inclusion to things that leaders already care about, like risk, risk mitigation, efficiency, adoption, workload, cost. The conversation is changing because you're talking into the language. And I came to realize that leadership usually doesn't resist inclusion or accessibility. They resist unclear value and meaning here. Now, I would like to take a moment to connect this back to your own experience. So think about a project you've worked on recently or one that you're currently involved in. And I'm going to put 2 questions in the chat. The first one being, what are you already doing into your projects from day-to-day work to consider accessibility and inclusion? And then what challenge do you encounter when trying to consider accessibility and inclusion into your work? I'm going to put this in the chat and pause for a few seconds to let you answer. And if anyone would like to share a quick example or insights, I would love to hear it. So just jump in and don't hesitate to use the chat if this is a preferred way for you to communicate. We have a question from Shannon that says, digital accessibility is a large portion of my work currently. I think some people have a hard time understanding the value of plain language. Definitely. Then we have Trisha saying system enhancement. We try to build it in. To build it in, we face system constraints and differences between the Canadian and American software. This is a big one. I don't have an answer to this, unfortunately. In my department, we are currently going into a little bit of transformation, trying to use MS List and Power BI to kind of automate those famous Excel logs for operational teams. And we are exploring how Power BI can be accessible, which is something very difficult. Any other questions? All right. So before we wrap up, I just want to highlight that there are many resources available if you would like to explore this further, both on GBA Plus, inclusivity, and accessibility. I've also developed some practical tools and templates that I've used into my projects. That is including inclusive kickoff checklists, inclusive project charters, decision matrix, etc., just to build some easy ways to integrate inclusion into my DMAIC approach. And I am very happy to share those, so please feel free to reach out after the session, either via emails or MS Teams. And I believe the presentation from today will be shared into a PDF format afterwards, but Craig, if I am mistaken, please jump in and correct
me. It's already, the link is already in the chat.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. So all the links provided on this page will be accessible from the PDF format of this presentation. I'm just going to go back to the chat here.
Marie-Ève, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So something I've observed is that if we leave it to goodwill, our good intentions to consider accessibility and how accessible we're making our solutions and systems, if we leave it to goodwill, we're probably going to forget because we'll get busy. Or do you have any tips on how we as change agents can kind of build some reminders or triggers or cues to remind us to, this is the time when we should be doing, focusing on these things. And, you've given us kind of a step-by-step into DMAIC sense of where you can do these things, but any sense of how you can make that like become a habit?
I think it's part of integrating into your processes and the tools that you use, your templates, just as a reminder to constantly use those kind of check-ins. If you're in a team with multiple team members, you could define the role of someone being kind of the master that will take the lead of reminding everybody to do those check-ins. It could be meeting invites before your project starts of just a little reminder, do your inclusive and accessibility check. There's a ton of ways to implement this into your work, and it's all about how people work. We all work really differently. We all use our tools very differently. So I think there is no perfect answer here. Is just to find a way to integrate this visibly into your work and the tools.
So build it into the tools so that as you use the tool, it cues you to do the right thing.
It doesn't give you a choice, basically.
Got it. Thanks.
David, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks for this wonderful presentation. Unreal stuff. I'm curious to know if you had, or you're consulting with a group and they had only the amount of time to focus on improving one phase of DMAIC to make it inclusive, which phase would you recommend they focus on to make those improvements, and why?
I am debating between the define or the measuring phase, because the define, you have to input this into your problem statement. It has to be into your project charter. It has to be into your scope. And I would say into measuring phase, well, if you're analyzing some data that is touching different groups, then you will all start developing kind of your analysis and then your improvement based on that data that you have measured.
Thanks.
Thank you. There is a question here. From your experience, which DMAIC stage people struggle applying the inclusive approach? That is a good question. I would say almost it is the define phase, because the define phase is the one that you will mostly involve most of your leaders, your sponsors, your stakeholders. So you have to kind of build through the resistance right from the start. And some people can really struggle with that. If I missed a question in chat, please let me know. But I think the others are just sharing some feedback, which is really appreciated. And I'm going to take the time to review all of this after the session. So thank you for the insight.
Maria, can I ask another one? Sorry to dominate.
Yes. Go ahead.
I've had more time to think about this than some people, because you shared these ideas with me months back, and I've had time to kind of let them decant a bit more. If you were sharing, just if the people who were sitting in the session today, if they were going to do just one thing, like a change agent, if they're going to do just one thing differently coming out of this session, do you have a sense of what that would be, or what would be one or two things? Like,
put yourself in the shoes of someone that needs accommodation. Put yourself in the shoes of someone that would have to use a screen reader, or that has neurodivergence, that might experience a process differently. I think we are all humans, and the beauty of humans is that we relate with deep empathy when we have differences. So just putting yourself into the shoes of someone that needs those type of accommodation can change it.
Cool. And can you give us like an example, like some practical examples, like pick like a certain condition and help us just think through that experience? Because one thing to say, put yourself in the shoes of, but if I've never been there, I don't know how to do that. Maybe.
I'll pick mine. So I have ADHD, and I have the fast type of ADHD, where my brain processes information really fast, and then everything starts to crumble after that. I think mine is just when something is unclear, the language is not plain, there's a ton of acronyms, the information that my brain is looking for, like looking for some type of data, is kind of sandwiched between two paragraphs of text, and then I have to read everything. So this is one that I would take an example. Another example that I could provide is just the easiest one, which is someone that has a visibility impairment where they have to use a screen reader. That is very eye-opening because you will find that most of the software that we use are not accommodated for screen readers. And most of the content that we produce, especially with AI and automation, doesn't accommodate for screen readers either.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thanks, everyone.